Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from the South. When I give a response, I expect to get some feedback. Hey, thank you all for joining us for this contemporary military forum titled Reality of War, Forging Teams for the Future Fight. As your professional association, the Association of the United States Army is proud to provide forums like this one throughout the year that broaden the knowledge base of Army professionals and those who support the Army. AUSA amplifies the U.S. Army's narrative to audiences inside the Army and help further the association's mission to be a voice for the Army and support for soldiers. Of course, we can't do this alone. AUSA relies on all of its members to tell the story of the Army and support our soldiers and their families. A strong membership base is vitally important for our advocacy efforts in Congress, the Pentagon, and the Defense Industrial Base, and in our publics throughout 122 chapters within the United States and in 9 countries. Thank you for that continued support. So for our speakers, we have a gift. It's less than $25, General. You know what my last job was, so we made sure you were good to go. On behalf of General Brown, AUSA's President and CEO, please accept that token. Now return over to our great moderator, the Professor Carolyn V. Davison, the Associate Dean of College of International Security Affairs at National Defense University. Let's give her a hand.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see everyone here. Thank you, General Smith. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here at AUSA. As you heard from the General just now, I teach for National Defense University, but we have this program down at Fort Liberty, which is mostly focused on special operations soldiers, and I have a suspicion that AUSA invited me here today with this esteemed panel to pull me out of my special operations comfort zone and get me up to speed properly with what the conventional Army is up to these days. And frankly, I couldn't have 3 better professors of joint warfighting to educate me on what is happening with joint warfighting and the US Army. So let me introduce you to them very briefly, because we're anxious to get this conversation going at speed. So we have General Andrew Pappas, who really needs no introduction, Commanding General of US Army Forces Command. To his left, we have Lieutenant General Sean Bernabe, who's joining us from the 3rd Armored Corps. And then to his left, we have a fellow Brit, Major General James Martin, who is the General Officer Commanding of the 3rd UK Division, the Iron Division. So I wanted to just refocus your attention. I know it's been a long 3 days on the title for this panel, which is helpfully broadcast behind me, or not behind me, over here. We're going to focus on the reality of war, which is something, frankly, that none of us particularly enjoy talking about, but as we're seeing play out in Ukraine and now in Israel as well, it's frankly out there as a matter of urgency for us to focus on. That reality requires warfighters who are educated, trained, and equipped to be all they can be, playing on the AUSA theme for this year's conference. And that clearly is an imperative that all 3 of our panelists are very much focused on. We will also be looking at forging teams, and I like this selection of the verb forging, because this also speaks to an imperative, namely putting people under pressure, putting teams under pressure, and seeing and ensuring that something better comes out of that process. Teams, I think we can all acknowledge, are the bedrock of what we're talking about and what we're seeing evolve, and I'm really excited to have 3 panelists who absolutely can speak to their own experience in forging a variety of different teams, including at the multinational level. We heard recently from our new Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General C.Q. Brown, a really important quote that I'd like to highlight for us today. He insisted that honing our warfighting skill has primacy in all that we do. And that is very much going to inform what we're going to talk about here today. So the scheme of maneuver for today. So I am going to open up for some brief comments from our panelists. We're then going to be focused on you to ask excellent questions and take advantage of the expertise we have here on this panel today. There are two mics pre-positioned there. So start thinking about your questions, jotting down notes, and we will turn it over to you for questions. And remember, 3 themes that give you a nice broad aperture to cover for today: reality of war, forging teams, and that third one, the future fight. You're in for a real treat today. So, General Pappas, we're on day 3 of AUSA. I wondered if you might start our conversation off with things that have really struck you in the conversations that you've heard. Now we're on day 3, or perhaps even things that you feel haven't been discussed adequately up to this point. Sir, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you for being here. And for us, it's a privilege to share the stage with you. Handpicked to come in, you've got an incredible reputation, so we actually wanted you to be up here and to facilitate this discussion. And as we progress, you'll see why that she is up here and the insights that you're going to provide. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
And you know, nobody wants to be the last panel of a week. I get it. It's actually a great place to be, because then you get to glean all the insights from each one of the different engagements we had throughout the week, through all the other senior leaders that have spoken on the multiple topics, not the least of which, is our own chief, General Randy George. And you heard him at the beginning of the week, and he went through his 4 priorities. And his number 1 priority, is warfighting. And it should be, because that's what we exist to do, to fight and win our nation's wars. And he put a responsibility on each one of these 4s, and for warfighting, it's Forces Command, for the CONUS, then Charlie Flynn and Darrell Williams for each of their respective regions. But we take that seriously. We exist solely to build readiness to fight and win that next fight. And we've had a lot of discussions about readiness, and that's one of the key components here. But one of the things comes up, said readiness, ready. But it's really ready for what? How do you further define that? And I'll tell you, over the last 20 years of continuous conflict, we've had a level of clarity. I'll tell you, whether it was going into battalion command, squadron, brigade, even division command. When I took command, I'd tell people, part of my speech, our future is written, because I knew we were going to deploy. I knew where we were going to deploy to. I could tell you the time we went to. And you had a great visibility, both of the human terrain you're going to be operating in, the physical terrain, a level of clarity that was there. We no longer have that clarity. And just sitting through last couple of days of engagements, you heard Charlie Flynn as he walked through all the challenges that he has in the Indo-PACOM theater. You heard Darrell Williams walk through after not only the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, but he also owns Africa and the challenges across the entire continent that he faces. And you look no further than any one of the TVs throughout this whole area to see the horrific terrorist invasion by Hamas into Israel. And you realize that the world today is much more uncertain, and it is a much more dynamic environment that we have to prepare for. So ready for what? I tell people the future is not written. And we've done an assessment. So at Forces Command, you can't just walk out and say it's not written, good luck. So we looked out, we came up with 4 paradigms ourselves in order to be prepared for any uncertainty that arrives worldwide, because we're a global power. And those 4 principles are what we base our training methodology on. And the first is you have to win, trust, and empower people. And that comes down to that individual, the human dynamic of the American Army. And it's building those teams, building the trust, the competence, making sure that it's a cohesive fighting force that has the will to fight together. That is an empirical advantage that you have. And those in combat know that those intangibles are absolutely essential. The second is winning the first fight. We have to be prepared. We don't have weeks, months, or years to prepare our formation. It has to be prepared today, right now when the call comes. So we have to make sure that those team squads are ready to fight that first fight and win at the pointy edge of the spear. We have to ensure that at echelon, we have expertise, that the battalions, the brigades, and as we elevate to the division, that we have expertise in the execution of our tasks so that we can be predictive in the transitions in the battlefield. We can go over multiple time horizons, that we can synchronize the warfighting functions in the fight to bring to bear the full capabilities that we have at the right time and place to better enable winning that fight. That is the condition setting that we have to do. That's the first fight. We also have to prepare to win the future fight. We had some great insights from Jim Rainey and team yesterday from Futures Command. That's the modernization. The temporal nature of the fight that we're in today and the threats around the world, we have to make sure that we sequence saying, walk the halls. And you saw the incredible capabilities that are being developed and those that we have. Some we already have, but we have to have the time in a deliberate manner to bring those capabilities into our formation, making sure the formation is ready to receive them, not only on the soldier side, if it's a piece of equipment, but the facility side. And then we have to train on it so that we can expertly employ it. That takes time. That's the future fight, and we're going to win that. Otherwise, you're going to fight it with the same equipment you have in your motor pool today 5 years from now, and it's going to have a worse OR rate, and it's just going to be more broken down. We have to build the formation today for the future fight. And last, we have to win as a total force. And I'm talking all 3 compos, not just active, but active, guard, reserve, and our allies and partners. That's the way that we're fighting. James is here because he was part of our exercise program. He's part of a future one. The Guard and Reserve, we've just gone through a synchronization to make sure that we have more formations incorporated into the training, both the virtual, the simulation, and live. So we train together to build those same teams that we talked about at the beginning. So those are the 4 principles that we've taken in our approach to training the formation for that fight. And I look forward to discussing any one of those throughout this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. General Bernardi, so we hear future remains unwritten, but what about the reality of what we're looking at right now?
Yes, thanks, Caroline. And sir, thank you for allowing me to be a part of the panel. Special welcome to Major General James Martin. You know, I consider him a part of the 3rd Armored Corps. We fought together with the 3rd Division UK numerous times in simulated combat. He's a warrior, he's a scholar, he's a great teammate. So great to see you. So ladies and gentlemen, it's been about 600 days since we all watched the Russians invade Ukraine. So for 600 days, we've all had a chance to watch the character of war change right before our eyes. And we've had a chance to really watch and learn to appreciate the challenges of large-scale combat operations in the current environment. We've seen that combined arms maneuver is still the key or a key to success. But we've also seen how difficult combined arms maneuver can be. And in fact, often it's easier to stop combined arms maneuver than it is to generate it. We've also seen that the fire's warfighting function has perhaps regained its place as the tactical center of gravity. The side with the most tubes and the longest range, the best sensors, and the shortest sensor-to-shooter linkage is the side that's going to win. We've watched the high number of casualties. And among those casualties, we've seen leaders who were perhaps even in a command post that was well back from the front line, but although a long way back, absolutely vulnerable. We've watched the challenges of sustaining a large-scale combat operation. And it's not just about the ammunition and the repair parts and the fuel at the tactical level, but it's also about magazine depth and industrial capacity at the national level. We've seen that in reality, the air domain, the maritime domain, and the space and the cyber domains are contested now. And where we had perhaps an advantage in the past, we no longer have and must assume those contested environments. And we've observed the outsized influence of information on this modern battlefield. And as we watched it, we were reminded of the importance of things like operational security and deception. So we heard from a couple of the senior leaders yesterday and even the day before about our responsibility as military professionals especially to watch what's happening and to take note as the character of war has changed. And therefore, I think most of us have seen this all as a call to action. We still must build teams, cohesive and disciplined teams, but now we must change the context in which we train and make sure that we are truly capturing the realities of this modern battlefield. And so as we watch what happens in Ukraine, as we now watch what's happening in the Middle East, and as we contemplate what may happen in the Indo-Pacific region, we must change that context for training. Now, in the 3rd Armor Corps, we've done a lot of that changing. We've been helped by teammates like the National Training Center and the Joint Readiness Training Center. I look forward to spending some time today talking about those specifics. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. General Martin, so forging teams. Talk to us a little bit about your perspective on teams.
Yes, thank you very much. And may I just start by saying it's a genuine privilege to be here as part of this august panel and to be engaging with that storied and esteemed institution that is the Association of the United States Army. I'm hugely grateful for the opportunity to be here and the invite extended by General Poppas and AUSA. So, building or forging teams for warfighting. And I'll start by saying I think it's a truism to say that effective teams increase one's competitiveness. I think when it comes to warfighting, we need to be a bit more specific about what the advantage good teams provide us with, and then build those teams accordingly. And of course, looking at Ukraine and what's gone on there over the past 20 months is instructive, if only to remind ourselves that prior to February the 24th of last year, there were many predicting that the Russian land forces would overrun Ukraine in a matter of days, or at the outside chance, a matter of weeks. And the fact that that did not come to pass has a lot to do with how those respective armies built their teams and the ensuing moral and physical components and the will to win. So examining it through that prism, I think, is important. And why is it important for us? Because as we build joint, collective and combined readiness, it's clear that we need to prepare for a fight in which our opponent outnumbers us and has numerical superiority, certainly in people and platforms, to which we need a response. And what is our response? What is our advantage? Well, at least a great deal of it, I think, lies in the concept of achieving tempo, that rate of military activity relative to one's opponent. And I would say it's impossible to build genuine operational tactical tempo without mission command. That concept, which focuses on empowering our teams around the central and singular imperative of achieving the mission. And of mission command's foundational principles, it is the trust and the shared understanding that are absolutely pivotal. And I'm just going to offer 3 very brief observations about those that may hopefully provoke or at least bring a debate to the questions in due course. The first point is, when it comes to trust, there really is no substitute for exposure. Sets and reps, there's no substitute for it. And it is that exposure that one wants to have before one crosses the line of departure, and it cannot be built on the sidelines, which is why, things like, or training iterations like the warfighter exercise that 3rd United Kingdom Division was so privileged to take part in earlier on in this year are so pivotal because they act as forcing functions. And I am exceptionally grateful that something that is driven by leadership enables us to start building that team early on. And I would mention that General Poppas, 9 months out before the start of Warfighter 23-4, was already providing that opportunity for commanders' dialogue where we were exposed to one another and having that interaction that was vital. And I'm exceptionally grateful to both General Poppas and General Barnaby for the focus that they placed on commanders' dialogue across the international boundary at every level throughout the process. And as my senior mentor on that exercise, General Sir James Everard, is fond of saying, when commanders talk, the magic happens. So that's the first point. The second point, of course, I'll mention is interoperability. And when multinational teams come together to build interoperability, of the 3 aspects, the human, the procedural, and the technical, the human is the most important because it is the one that enables the other 2 to be achieved. So the procedural and the technical, no doubt, can be very, very challenging indeed. But unless, let's say, in a multinational environment alliance like NATO, the contributing nations act in good faith, there is no procedural or technical interoperability, and that requires trust. It also requires the right ethos in training. And again, using Warfighter as an example, it was very instructive to see how from ForceCom, through 3rd Armored Corps, through the Mission Command training program to the senior mentors, on a daily basis, the discussion wasn't about who was winning, but was about whether we are learning organizations or not. And that established the right ethos that allowed that trust to be built across the team. And my final point is to do with what I mentioned at the start as a founding principle of Mission Command, and that is shared understanding. And as we come together to build multinational teams, that shared understanding becomes more, not less, important. That idea of what does each nation, what does each army, respective army, bring to the fight, and where is it best apportioned and applied on the battlefield to ensure that the team is an effective one. And it's an idea that I think the US Army is exceptionally good at. That is defining the fight at echelon, both vertically and horizontally, asking the question, which force is most appropriate, is best configured, is best resourced and trained to deliver what desired effect, where on the battlefield, and in what epoch of time. And I think the US Army does that very well, because until you understand that synergy and you manifest it, then I think unity of effort is impossible, and unity of effort is the thing that makes sure the whole of the team is greater than the sum of the parts. So that there, I think, is the acme of building warfighting teams, really is shared understanding that underpins trust, which enables mission command, which itself allows tempo to be achieved, and tempo is what delivers the win. And on that note, I think I will stop, but I very much look forward to continuing the discussion in questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So you heard this term trust used several times, and of course I'm thrilled. General Braga always says you can't surge trust, and I think in an international context that obviously makes a lot of sense. The other thing that struck me is the brand new AUSA logo. I think also speaks to this dynamic. It certainly speaks to what I've been seeing with you all as well, this development of trust, helping others, right, pulling them up as well, I think is so neatly captured in this new logo too. Moving from there though, less nice in some ways, I suspect, I want to focus you all back on the current operational environment, specifically Europe, and of course I'd really like to hear more on Indo-Pacific as well. Sir, I would love to hear more from you on how your thinking is changing based on what we're learning from those theaters in terms of how you prepare formations. General Bernabe, I'd like to hear more about the National Training Centre's role in that. And then General Martin, I would love to explain, please, to this audience a little bit more about the warfighting exercise and what goes into that. So I'll throw it back open to you, sir.
Well, thank you. Well, the first, I think when you look worldwide at what's taken place, we've gone around the number of issues that are arising that we're focused on. But if you look at the Ukraine, I think one of the things it has done is it actually validated our training methodology. And what do I mean by that? It's the repetition of the drill. It's validation of those warfighting functions. It is your mission essential tasks that you have to execute to the highest degree of proficiency, the combined arms maneuver. And that's what we focus on. That is our baseline foundation. And that's whether it's a home station training, whether it's in the training centers, we focus for mastery of those mission essential tasks. And I think we've done pretty well with that. I'll go back to, as a youngin', we trained for, war on the European plains. Now, on two separate occasions, we did a pretty good job of then projecting that same type of warfare, maneuver warfare, into the Middle East. So we can train and maintain that proficiency at the highest level. Then there's regional adaptation of that and our ability to project that combat power forward. But you have to be competent, you have to be master of the professions at that execution level. Now, we are looking at what's taking place, and we're adjusting the operating environment in which you're going to be executing that. And a great way, and I won't take away from the complete training centers, but we have seen, first, we're operating in multiple more domains than we had previously. You're looking a lot more in the space and the cyber domain. We have to look at our capabilities and our technical competencies and how we're operating in that. And then we'll talk a little bit about moving from the brigade to the division. But as we define fights at echelon, who's got the capability to execute in that domain? And then once you've defined that, providing the capabilities in order to execute those tasks. And where do those reside? So we're introducing those more into the operating environments. NTC is a great example. We also know it's a transparent battlefield. Sean talked very well about and outlined, the risk you have of senior leaders that are being killed. That's because our headquarters out in the field have gotten grossly large because they were not at risk when we were in Afghanistan and Iraq. That is not the case in the Ukraine. So we've seen that in this transparent battlefield. If it can be seen, it can be killed. So we have to reduce it. You have to blend in. You're not going to disappear. So how do you blend into the natural terrain? Both the physical terrain, then also in the electronic warfare spectrum. So how do you have multiple elements that can operate as one, but you're going to have be in disparate locations? And that's one of the things that we're training on today, the use of both satellites, electronic warfare, collect. We're also seeing drones. I mean, they're on the TV every night when you watch them, but how do we incorporate drones? Not only for our own capabilities to build mass for resupply, for our new ISR platforms, the ubiquitous nature of them, but then also how do you defend against them and us up by different types? And we've incorporated those out into the training center and multiple others. As we see and glean, we incorporate it in. When we talk about the training center, I'm probably going to steal one of your pieces. The physical distance of the fight. And an upcoming rotation Sean has set up, and I'll let you know that, we are replicating some of our resupply by air to those that we would see on the European continent. And that's all I hold, because I know that we've had the initial planning conferences for that. But we have to continue to learn. Now, I go back to your core competencies are your METL tasks, mission essential tasks, that which what you must do in the combined arms fight. And from there, we can adapt to the region.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, I'll build on that. Clearly the training centers do an amazing job driving, the movement and the adjustment in our training, providing the complexity that we see in the real world. And again, that's both at NTCG, RTC, JMRC in Europe. The tyranny of distance. As an example, in this rotation coming up, 24-3, 1st Armor Division will run an air line of communication from Fort Bliss, Texas to Fort Irwin. Why did we decide to do that? Well, it's about the same distance from Bliss to Irwin as it is from Bremerhaven to Suwałki. And yes, in Europe today, as part of the competition phase, combat aviation brigades have to do those kinds of long legs in support of the fight. And it's easy to see how that might be a requirement on that continent or even in the Indo-Pacific. The tyranny of distance is something very real and something we must train for. But the other thing I'll highlight is while the training centers have done a lot to change the complexity of the training environment, the drone swarms, the EMS, now OPFOR with robotics, what we must do is bring that complexity and that challenge to the home station so that we train that at places like Fort Cavazos, Fort Bliss, Fort Riley, Fort Carson. We expose teams at the early part of their readiness glide path to those complexities. And we're already working towards that, and we're moving pretty quickly to create that very environment at all of our home stations. But as we talk about building teams and forging teams, nothing does that better than tough, realistic training. And that can happen at home station. That certainly happens at the training centers, and frankly, it's a great thing to watch.
Thank you, sir.
And so to exercise Warfighter. So exercise Warfighter is a command post exercise designed to test the command and control of higher tactical formations, specifically focused at the divisional and corps levels. It uses a simulated environment to provide realistic data that commanders, command post, and headquarters can respond to. So at one level, whilst it doesn't replicate the frictions of maneuvering, division or brigade size formations on the ground, it is also not limited by it, and by virtue of that, can really give the command and control and headquarters and their processes a run out and put commanders inside a bubble that is genuinely testing for them. It also, I would add, although our troops are not on the ground, it's not a small endeavour. And for us as the United Kingdom's warfighting division, still required us to lift and shift 4,000 British soldiers across the Atlantic to Fort Cavazos in order to make this happen, which is in and of itself practices the mobilisation and deployment of forces for any future fight. My final point would be, from a UK perspective, it is the only current method we have for validating a warfighting division and assuring its readiness through command and control examination at the moment. And it's why it's such a privilege for a UK division to be able to fight as part of a fully worked up US corps. Thank you.
If I can add one thing on this most recent warfighter, 23-4, one of the things that I think really allowed us to, one, stretch our legs and practice combined arms maneuver as a corps, but also take this new doctrine, multi-domain operations out of 3.0, and take it for a really good test drive, was this new scenario, which really opened the aperture, included the entire country of Lithuania in the scenario, and set conditions for a corps movement to contact, a corps operation actually maneuvering divisions. Been a long time since we've done that. I learned a lot, as did I think the divisions, trying to synchronize combined arms maneuver at that level, but then also how to achieve convergence, converge effects in multiple domains at the corps level to set conditions for divisions in the fight. And I think as we continue to stretch that scenario, it'll allow us to get even better at practicing the realities of combat in this environment. By the way, we have a tendency to upgun the opposition force every time. We were outnumbered. They had far more tubes and better range, and that is a problem in and of itself, and took some real creative problem solving in a tactical environment to defeat them. It's possible, and that was a really good part of the operation as well.
Great. So we just had General Martin and General Bernabe talk about this focus on the division now, and the fact that the US Army is elevating the division as its principal tactical warfighting formation. General Pappas, could you weigh in here a little more to explain what the thinking is behind that and how it has shifted training?
Well, and our doctrine itself, as Sean referenced 3.0, and I won't ask everybody in the audience who actually read it, because I know you raised your hand, didn't mean it, but we're elevating to the division level. Previously, as Sean touched upon, the corps maneuver, the brigade combat power has a limit to what it can project into the space in which it can operate in. For large-scale combat operations, where it's the division and multiple division of fights is where you're going to be able to see nest those capabilities for both the synchronization and the capabilities and the execution of those, and then the time, space, and distance in which we're operating in. That's going to rest now at the division level in order to fight in that forum. And then it'll be the multiple division fights that we see within our core warfighters. But we have to elevate it up, and one of the learning points that we've had is as we move from the brigade to the division, again, there are new domains in which we're operating in. What does the structure in that headquarters have to look like? What are we going to harvest out of the brigade and now is going to move to the division? And then at the division level, what do we have to build out so we have the capability to employ all the different capabilities that we have out there? And there's an educational part to this. And I've used it before. If you recall back to as an infantry at the basic and advanced course, you used to have the chalkboard, or that's a predecessor to the whiteboard. But you used to have all the capabilities you'd have on the board. And as you'd employ them, you'd cross them out. Well, we've gotten so complex today that there are capabilities that we have at the division and higher level that not everybody has full visibility and understanding of. So if we don't even know what we have capability-wise, how are we synchronizing that in time and space to get the convergence that you need, to build the tempo for the continuous operation to stay in the enemy loop? So an educational piece, the division's going to be that principal tactical formation, the future fight. Now it's building a training mechanism around it so that we can elevate our intellectual propensity and understanding of the fight, but then through the war fighters, how do we refine our staff capabilities in order to employ it? And the last thing I'll touch upon in our training methodology, that's all good. We've all done war fighters. And if you run out of water, you hit the computer button 3 times and water appears. Now taking that division level that you've built a level of excellence and expertise set in a war fighter, and once you refine your staff process, we're taking the division into the dirt. So a division rotation out at the NTC or the JRTC in California. We've done 2 out of national training and a 3rd one coming. Why? Because you've got to have that friction of doing it live. When you come off fiber, when you put that division out there, and then we'll EDRI, as we did the last one, we took it to Vardy, brought the whole artillery headquarters out. We took a full aviation brigade, put them in the dirt, and most importantly, a sustainment brigade. Rarely have we taken that echelon of our logistics out into the field and then having to execute operations on a continuous basis in order to run your staff planning and processing, build the tempo, but then execute all those functions in a contested environment. And it's different. The one thing I talk about log is the artillery commander went black on water at NTC because it gets pretty hot out there. And then they realized when they went to resupply, they went to the sustainment brigade, to the truck company, said, hey, we got to get water there, emergency resupply. And it wasn't a computer button because the OR rate on the trucks was down and they couldn't drive the trucks. So that's the reality we have to induce into our training and the friction of combat that you only get by doing it in the dirt.
Thank you, sir. I think you're hitting on something there that is making me want to lean back into this whole future fight aspect of what we're covering today. I'm going to ask this question, but I'm also going to encourage you all to start coming up to the microphones, take the pressure off me so you can start asking questions too. If you are shy and would prefer to write your question down, I believe there are some index cards at the back, but I really do encourage you all to come to there are 3 microphones, introduce yourself and pose your question. But I'm keeping the gavel for now. Future fight. So a lot of new technology. We just heard reference there to this very hot topic right now of contested logistics. We've had a lot of discussion about data and artificial intelligence. Can you speak a little bit to how you balance that investment in people and the investment in tools and how it's impacting how you think about your priority efforts right now? Yeah. And I'll throw that to anyone who'd like to jump in there.
Sure, I can talk to that. So as we were designing Warfighter 23-4, one of the things I asked for is I wanted us to be overwhelmed with information. I wanted our intelligence analysts to really have to wrestle with overwhelming amounts of information about the environment, really just to see if we could make sense of it all very quickly. And I also learned by doing that, be careful what you ask for because you just might get it. That's exactly what happened. In the first 24 hours, we were overwhelmed with the information we were getting. We had amazing sensors out there, an amazing array of sensors, and we were really struggling to make sense of all of that very quickly. We have amazing analysts, superstars, and they did the best they could. But what it illustrated for me and for everybody else who visited was that realm, the processing, exploitation, and dissemination of information is ripe for artificial intelligence. It's ripe for computer-aided decision-making. Again, we've got amazing analysts. What we really need are some tools to help them be even better, put them on the loop, and allow them to focus those tools to then help commanders like me and General James make decisions. So I think that's a great example, something that came out of the warfighter. I think there's other areas, in the logistics realm, the predictive logistics. As you talk about the tyranny of distance, if you're going to transit that distance with supplies, we sure hope it's the right supplies. I'd hate to get there 1,200 kilometers in and realize, man, we brought the wrong parts. And so that predictive logistics with some help, with AI or computer technology can make sure that we're providing the right sustainment at the point of need just in time.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments on future fight?
I'd just reiterate exactly what General Bernabé has said. Very often the rate limiter of our sensor to shooter and kill chain was the human being in the loop. So really rich data feeds, the array of sensors on the battlefield, utterly remarkable, but then still reliance, let's just take the intel picture, an intel analyst, in our case from the intelligence corps, taking that and then turning it into a product that the effectors and the shooters can then work. And I think that is where machine learning and artificial intelligence in future, will make their job harder. But of course, easier. As we define the future fight, warfare is still going to remain a fundamentally human endeavor. And so really it's about what does that human-machine teaming, what's the optimal balance of that teaming look like that I think is going to define the next epoch.
That's great. I don't think we had thought about team including tech and human together as well. I like that, running with that concept.
You know, if I could add one thing, General Rainey made a great point during the CMF he was a part of. He reminded us all that we are a values-based Army. And so while there might be an opportunity to get the human out of the loop, our values-based Army and our culture will prevent that, and probably for all the right reasons. So I think just figuring out how we enable those human beings with the right technology is going to be the way ahead.
That's a terrific message as well. So we have one brave soul who's approached the microphone. Sir, would you like to introduce yourself and ask your question?
My name's Colonel Ryan McCormick. I have a question, Sir General Bernarby, for you, and General Martin for you as well, tied to the forging of teams, perhaps a little bit of your experience in the most recent warfighter. And sir, certainly for you, having done this almost back-to-back, and your experience as a division commander working with the Iron Division as well. And I'll preface it this way. In particular, Sir General Martin received a master class in leadership from one of your predecessors, obviously General Sir Patrick Saunders, who had this quote when he gave it many years ago, and he talks about, it's not command relationships that matter, it's relationships amongst commanders. And Sir General Bernarby, for you, I'd be interested in getting a little bit of your perspective from your experience as a division commander, having fought with an allied division in sharing that boundary. And then what are some of your TTPs and personal examples that you use to build teams this second go around, having been where you are? Understanding, listening to General Williams yesterday, certainly as you look at the battle space, and particularly in the continent of Europe, where there's going to be clearly opportunities either bilaterally or through a larger alliance where we're going to perhaps have to do this again. And understanding, Sir General Martin, for you, there's no normative approach to building a team and forging these teams. What are some of the techniques that you use and have learned through your career as you've been a good teammate and moving forward? I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, so General James had it exactly right. When we talk about interoperability, you know, we've got the three dimensions. The technical and the procedural sometimes seem like the most important. They're certainly daunting, but it's that human that is critical. And it's that human interoperability that really takes a lifetime to build. You know, my working with the 3rd Division from the UK didn't start when I was the commander of 1st Armored Division. It really started long before that. I had a chance to work with them numerous times as the G3 for U.S. Army Europe. And the most important part of that was getting to know some of those players, so that when I found myself as the other Iron 6, or I guess Torch 6, during the exercise, we had to change the call sign because we realized we have two U.S. Division and the 3rd UK had the same call sign. It doesn't work in a warfighter. But as Torch 6, I already knew some of the people, and I also knew a little bit of the culture and how our British allies fight. We also had then and still have a British DCG. So I had a translator right there in the formation, but somebody who could help us connect. And so we had a propensity to build that connection from day one, long before we found ourselves in the command post exercise on the road to the actual exercise. So that's a part of it. You know, certainly brought a lot of that up to the corps level. And, you know, the day I took command on the 4th of October, okay, when's my first phone call with Iron 6? Not Iron 6 at Fort Bliss, but Iron 6 at the 3rd UK. And making sure we had them linked into our entire road to war, brought them into the academics at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, as we were thinking big thoughts of how the Corps was going to fight, and all the way through. And then, of course, as we brought them into Fort Cavazos, receiving them and integrating them into the team, you know, every possible way, and making sure that that they felt like the true valued members of the teams they were. So that's a huge part of it. I am super excited that we're going to continue doing this together as we go forward. And as I told them at the end of the exercise, when we get called for real and America's hammer is in the fight, I want the 3rd Division UK as part of that team. Absolutely. General James, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you very much. So to your premise, I couldn't agree more. It's about, of course I agree with the Chief of the General Staff, General Sir Patrick Sanders, when he says it's about relationships amongst commanders, but it absolutely is. And I go back to two things stated already. It's about sets and reps and it's an exposure, but that doesn't happen unless the leadership create those opportunities. But just as importantly, create the ethos amongst the training audiences, the teammates, that allows people to have their voice to speak at every opportunity. And I thought what was so empowering about this journey to and through Warfighter 23-4 was we were always part of the America's Hammer team. We were always there. Our judgments and our opinions and what we said were valued, but that starts with leadership and why leadership is such a personality-driven and human endeavor. And you say, what are the things that helped that grease the wheels? And it starts, next to the barbecue. It starts, to the invite to the house. It's really human things like that that make you part of the value team. It's, it's turkey hunting with Pegasus 6 at 4 o'clock in the morning out on the back area.
It's an open invitation.
It's all those things. But I couldn't agree more. And I go back to what General Sir James Everard, as a senior NATO member, says, when commanders talk, the magic happens. Thank you.
And it's by design, Mac, and you know this, and I appreciate you not directing the question to me, let them take them. But I know. but take a look what we have programmatically. First, look at all the theater engagements that we have, the joint exercise programs, whether it's the pathways over in the Indo-PACOM, the Defender series through Europe, the warfighters that we have and the ones in the future. I look at the Guard and the state partnership programs that they have throughout the countries. Each one of those by design is resourced and they're all nested to build and nurture these relationships that we have worldwide so that at the time it continues to build and flourish. And that's why when we talk about cutting exercise money, we said it's beyond just the tasks that we're refining. It's fighting together, building the relationships, those bonds through the shared experiences. Just as we say that in the squad, it happens between nations, it happens between compos, and that's where we have to continue.
I think it's something we spend so much time talking about. How do we prepare for navigating uncertainty? What you're throwing out here is absolutely critical to understand. And the deliberate design behind it is something I think that we take for granted, frankly, oftentimes as well. Sir, you've been very patient. Your question, please.
I will yield the floor to the man in uniform.
Oh, double. I'm going to get you in stereo.
All right, thanks. You're going to regret that. So, sir, for General Martin, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Major General Chris Callahan. I serve as the Adjutant General for Rhode Island, and I was just hoping perhaps you could share with us a couple of your thoughts on, how the 3rd UK, matriculates its reserve component into its workload. And as General Pappas mentioned, as we started here, we do feel like we're part of the total force. We know in the Army that it's all 3 compos to get the job done. And so perhaps you could just share a little bit about the UK construct. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Really apposite, because under our last integrated review of defense, the Army's contribution to that was something called Future Soldier. And Future Soldier had baked into its premise from the very start a golden thread of a reserve component to it, including in its warfighting units. So it starts with an approach. The reserve, the whole force approach that is ethos driven, cannot be an addendum. It must be part of the initial premise and the initial planning. So Future Soldier did that. It doesn't mean it's not without its challenges, and the UK mobilization and reserve system is different to here in the United States, and that raises challenges about the laws surrounding mobilization, etc. But it starts with an approach that says reservists inevitably will be part of the fight. And now what we're refining as part of what's known as Future Soldier Refine, or the next steps for Future Soldier, is what is the most appropriate and effective tiering aligned against the NATO New Force model tiers where our reservists can be mobilized in a realistic time frame and add value. And of course, the answer is how long's a piece of string. There are those elements of the reserve force will need to be integrated right from the get-go, particularly when it comes to rare breed skill sets. And there are those that are more suited to the second echelon for force, as well as building the resilience in depth for a protracted conflict as well. It's a challenge, but it's a challenge that the Army and the UK defence as a whole has recognised and is now trying to do something about. What I do know is, the definition of madness is to do the same thing you've always done and then expect a different result. And so that recognition that we have to do things differently to provide a whole force approach in this workforce challenge time is critical.
So are you going to ask how long is a piece of string, or do you have it?
It's not that hard.
Then you may go ahead.
And I really like that because I'm just a colonel retired. My name is Brian Cook, and so I wielded the floor to a general officer, which is pretty good. So with our values-based, rule-based approach, as an alliance, as a nation, do you fear that our adversaries, armed with AI at scale and soon to be quantum, will come and win the first fight? And if they do, what shall we do?
General Purpose.
So if the question is, do I think, no. One, I don't think anybody's going to win the first fight against us in any domain, in any endeavor. But I do think, as we spoke about AI and all the different technologies that you walk the floors here, it's meant to enable the individual to exceed our capabilities as an individual by using these process AI-based, computer-based capabilities. I don't think if you were to take the individual out of that, and you're probably looking at a shooter system capability, that you're making a shoot, don't shoot. Can you shoot, should you shoot approach is usually the scenario that we have. I don't believe so. I don't believe so. And I think what AI is going to do is we talk about the depth of data and being able to use AI to generate what is actually critical for the individual to go through. It will find it to the point that will still keep our speed of execution.
Either of you want to weigh in on that one?
John, you think you're going to lose the first fight?
Sir, of course not. I'm going to agree with my boss.
Yeah.
It's the theme today as well.
I think, one of the things General James highlighted in his opening is the power of this mission command approach. And I still believe that's one of our advantages, against adversaries, is that we absolutely believe it and we've demonstrated the effectiveness of it. The power of empowering subordinates with a good intent and mission orders is immense. And we watch our adversaries, they don't do it. They can't do it. They don't know how to do it. They don't train their folks to do it. So I'm confident that with technology further enabling that approach, we will win that first fight and every fight thereafter.
We talk mission command, and as we talk about, was I started off and I talk about winning the first fight, but it's the battalions, the brigades, the division staffs. Mission command's a good buzzword, but the only way you get the level of competency to execute that is through repetition and knowing your job and how to do that, and working through the repetitions of who has to do what when, and being predictive in time over different planning horizons. That is why we continue to push that, not through just the training centers, but from home station forward. The staff has got to be proficient and operate at the speed of combat if we're going to have the ability to execute mission command.
Can we talk a little more about this? I'm hearing a few temporal themes, right? There's the fact that we all know that everything is happening at the speed of light right now. How do you have the kind of strategic discipline needed to prepare formations for a future fight when demand is still so very high? And then there's also that factor that I heard General James mention just now too, of the resilience, right? We talk about winning, but none of that winning seems to be likely to happen at speed, right? It's not going to be one and done. It's not going to be any type of victory that we're used to seeing, perhaps. So how do you build in that resilience to your planning as well?
Well, I think to the first point, you talked about strategic discipline, which is a central tenet to the national military strategy, the chairman's document that came out. And again, I want to ask for a show of hands who read it. I don't want to hurt Brian Grove's feelings because he was owning the pen when we worked together. But strategic discipline, it is the temporal nature of the fight. It's where do you accept risk at what time frame? We all accept where the pacing challenge is, where the acute challenge is, but how do you approach it today in competition versus potential future in conflict? So depending on who owns the risk. Now, I'm in the service. So for me, I look at the temporal nations. I talk about the future fight as the modernization. In order to modernize the force, we need time and have that formation back so that we can bring the new equipment in. They're not deployed forward. We can train on that new equipment, and then in a time horizon of the future, you now have got a better force that you can now employ for the competition or conflict. But that is not the risk that I own, because if I am a combatant commander or the subordinate component, I'm looking at competition today, and I see competition as iron on the ramp or a formation that's forward for an assure a deterrence force. So they need that capability today to be forward. If it's forward, I can't modernize it. So when you talk strategic discipline, part of the national military strategy was to accept additional responsibility, risk today to build the future force. Now, it's a great academic discussion, but in execution, just look at the world events that we talked about. It is much more difficult to who owns that risk when, as emerging threats continue to arise. But again, for me, in this hat, and I have looked at it from the joint perspective, we've got to accept some additional risk today. So when the future conflict comes, those capabilities that we have that exist today that are ready to be put into the formation are there. We're trained and ready to employ it out of competition and in conflict, because we won't have the time to modernize and train when that fight comes.
You know, you talked about the long fight, and you know, in my opening, I talked about the challenges of sustaining large-scale combat operations and the requirement for magazine depth and industrial capacity. In that first contemporary military forum, I think it was on Monday, listening to Mr. Bush talk about what the Army is doing with industry to rapidly increase our magazine depth and to make sure we have the industrial capacity and that we're modernizing and transforming an industry, you know, gave me a lot of reassurance. And, you know, our industry and our industry partners are amazing, and they are committed to making sure we can do this. So, again, I was happy to hear that. You know, Mr. Bush talks about, you know, our nation is the arsenal of democracy, and we could see that in action on the stage on Monday and listen to it from at least one of the industry partners.
I think the only thing I would add to that is to say that whilst we all accept that hope is not a strategy, in a long fight, the conditions, socio-economic and political, that exist now in which we're trying to solve that future problem of resilience will be different again. So whilst hope is not a strategy, I think part of strategic discipline is creating the provisions and planning now that assumes when an existential threat comes to any of our shores or to the alliance, you know, the collective threat, that the conditions will then be ripe for us to be successful, to have more recruits. You know, today, if you said to me, double the size of the British Army without any change, you know, in the you know, social economic construct, clearly that would be impossible. But with an existential threat, things change very fast. And going back to the Compo Reserve question of earlier, you know, some of the work we're doing in the British Army at the moment is what does a third echelon look like, and what backbone do you have to be planned to put in place so that you can take the next generation, you know, in and build the second, third, fourth echelons for that resilient long-term fight.
That's great. So again, I'm recalling the AUSA logo here, and we talked about the absolute vital importance of the relationships amongst commanders. But what about our soldiers, and what about, you know, small team levels? We've not really talked about that yet. How could you think through how this shift to division level operations changes how junior soldiers are expected to train? Would any of you be willing to take that one on?
I absolutely will, because it goes right to the very beginning of the, you know, that forging the team, building the teams, and empowering our leaders. And some of you heard it before, but the divisional fight is how we synchronize where those capabilities reside in the staff capacity in order to employ them. But the fight for the individual soldier is still going to look the same. In the dirt, looking behind the rear sight post of a weapon, and they're going to be executing these tasks. So that level of training is going to stay where it had always been. That repetition of the drill, the precision of execution. Soldier, team, squad, platoon, company. That's what's going to win that first fight moving forward, and the level of expertise. And the way they continue to build that, and you've heard it, it won't change. It starts at 6:30 every morning for PT formation and staying there beforehand. It's building those bonds that we do, whether it's in the barbecue or over these iterations of training. The same thing for the soldiers at PT. Before they stand out there, everybody's talking. You learn about each other. You know about the family. Anything that arose the night before is going to come out. And then at 6, and the leaders are listening and they're understanding the human dimension of the individuals. It's also a good time to talk, personal goals, values, what's taking place, and be able then to engage. And again, the human dimension of leadership's right there. 6:30, cannon goes off, flag goes up, right face, and you're leading PT. It is a physical endeavor, and if you can't physically lead, then you can't stay a leader, because you can't lead where you can't go. And that's where they need to be. Building that team, forging that formation in the crucible of different events, shared hardships, shared successes. And it continues on through the day. We have to unencumber our company commanders so that at the captain level and below, when training is going on, they're all out there. It's planned, it's resourced, and it's continued to be executed. And the last thing I'll touch upon, because I'm a little passionate about it, is the team we build has got to be kept together. We can't have this carousel of leadership where we're cycling people through and you never build those bonds of trust, especially if you have a deployment on the horizon. And it's just like a pro football team. After one Super Bowl, a week later, it's not the same team. You got to take them through that whole preseason where you build the new formation, individual up through the preseason and into the formation. We have put policy in place in order to maintain a team so that if you're deploying, previously, if you're leaving and it's going to be over a summer month, summer's our normal rotation, if you'd hit 2 years, you're going to come out. Even if you're deployed, then new people come in. That breaks up the team. We're changing that time frame. And why do we do that? Because it's 2 years. It's a false horizon, a false planning factor if the number one important is that cohesive, competent team winning in combat. So we're going to keep the team together. We're going to man it in advance, and we have the manning challenges, but a year out, we identify those formations, 6 months out at 90, up to 95%. They get the train together, and then we hold them through the deployment. And then at the command level, he can have individual identified. He or she can identify that this person can leave and they've got a mitigation plan so that you don't have the cascading effect at the end. But you man the team, you build the team and train it, and then you deploy the team. And then we start it again.
So if I can add one thing, I think we've had to relearn multi-echelon training, the multi-echelon training approach. And it's not new. Many of the senior folks in the room remember doing this all the time very well in the late 90s, for example. We had to relearn it. So that, for example, when you take a tank crew out to the range to qualify that crew, that entire battalion ought to be out in the field training all the other crews. The crew that's manning the logistics release point, the crew that's manning the map board in the command post, the folks that are running the logistics packages back and forth. It's that multi-echelon training so that every member of that team is getting that benefit. So we're building those cohesive teams at every part of the organization simultaneously, and continue that same model all the way up to brigade and division.
And we can incorporate simulation where the training itself won't have enough inputs throughout the entire staff. Simulation can augment that so that the full staff gets trained at that higher level task without having to use all the troop power to do that. And you're nesting with other planned events.
Yes, sir.
I mean, one of the consistent themes that's come out in all the discussions this week has been the centrality of our people. And for all of us, our people are our center of gravity. They're the thing that gives us our strength and that we must protect. And people have spoken quite a lot about the welfare of our people, their resilience, and I would concur with all of that. But when push comes to shove, I think General Patton's maxim still holds true. The greatest welfare that we can give our soldiers is effective and tough training.
On that note, sir, you had a question.
Thank you. Good afternoon, John Rafferty from Army Public Affairs. I wanted to first double down on General Pops's point earlier about the advantage of this time slot. I had the opportunity earlier to attend TRADOC's Strengthening the Profession panel. Clearly, we want to strengthen the profession so we have good leaders and good teams who can win the first fight and the future fight. That was clear through that. But the common denominator between this discussion and the one earlier was trust. Essential, obviously, to teams, and obviously essential to the health of the profession going forward. It kind of defined trust, though there's a lot of definitions, as maybe the sum of one or a unit's character, their competence, and their commitment. And then the next point made was that everything we do, every mission we give to units, every task we give them, everything we give to an individual, either builds trust or erodes trust. Going forward in building great teams, how do we guard against the things that would erode trust and then maybe risk winning that first fight? Over.
Great question.
I think I'll just make one point to start, and how we build and not erode trust is clearly central to a commander's thought process every day. I think it was something I discussed on ASEP-C a year ago now, but the first responsibility of any commander is to build hope in his team, give hope to his team. And I think that's right, and that builds trust, it builds the bonds and sinews. But I think what erodes trust is a lack of honesty up and down the chain of command. So we must sell hope, we must give our people hope in the proposition so that they know they're part of an effective fighting force that will do everything in their power to both win and to protect the individual and the team. But at the same token, the limit of exploitation on the selling of that hope is when there's a sense of not dishonesty per se, but a lack of clarity and transparency from the higher echelons to the lower echelons. And so we just need to really, certainly in the British Army, we've got to focus very clearly on not eroding trust by not patronizing our soldiers, being very honest with them, but we're telling them how we're going to win the fight. And that for me is sort of a daily mantra to myself that I try and apply to keep that trust quotient as high as possible.
One of the key tasks in my enduring intent is develop leaders who are not just proficient at all the leader tasks, but who are also engaged and empathetic, truly engaged in the care for their soldiers and their families, truly engaged in the training and development of their soldiers, truly engaged in the success of that unit. And oh, by the way, empathetic enough to put themselves in the shoes of the soldiers from all aspects and all environments. It starts with those type of leaders. I couldn't agree more with General Pappas. You see that at 0630 every morning. You see those engaged leaders doing all the things that we expect of leaders. And then it builds out from there. It's reflected in how we train those individual soldiers to be masters of warfighting and how we put those teams together to make the teams cohesive, disciplined, and lethal. And making sure that that training is not only tough and realistic, but it's properly resourced and it's well executed, and that it's truly building their confidence as a team. I think if we start with making sure our leaders are those kind of leaders, it'll all build out from there, and we will continue to strengthen trust and not erode it with all the things that we do every day.
Again, another topic I'm passionate about, but I think that it's a twofold approach. The first is the academic and going to the intellectual space. And as leaders at Echelon, you should have in your LPD, OPD program, these should be discussion topics. These should be books that you read about. I'm looking at Johnny Carson when we went back to the squadron days. So there's things that we read, then we talk about it. As you visualize the leader that you want to be, or you extrapolate some of the virtues of what you've just read, and you have that discussion of who you want to be, what is the expectation of your formation? And then you have to live it. It's easier to read it and say it, then you've got to live that, and you're going to get assessed every moment by doing that. But then out of the academic realm, it is that tough, realistic training. It's during that crucible of that training endeavor that you're doing, the harder the training, the better, that the true character of the individual comes out. You want to build trust, you do it when you're under duress, and you can see that you can trust that individual, whether the newest private or the senior person of that training event. How do they act under duress? And that's how trust is built, those shared hardships and shared successes. And nobody celebrates doing something easy, but they do celebrate when it was a hard endeavor. And also when it comes, people are going to fail. You're going to lose trust in individuals. It's probably pretty good to identify that early on, because then that person needs, counsel, corrected, and if not, they got to go, because you're not going to trust them in combat. So the endeavors that we undertake during the training will highlight those levels.
So you've made my soft heart happy by talking lots about people, and we've made my academic heart really happy by talking about reading lists. I hope with generated reading lists from this. I'm going to ask a question that is normally outside of my comfort zone as well, but I think it's very interesting and very important, namely that we have two infantrymen on stage who are in command of armored formations. I wonder if we can talk about the importance of tanks. How's that for shifting gears?
So my battle buddy, Commander Major John McDwyer, is probably all excited right now. He is a tanker. He's a tank master gunner.
I've got you. It's okay.
But I don't think General James and I would call ourselves infantrymen. We certainly are by background, but we are maneuverists. We're combined arms maneuverists. We endeavor to be experts at combined arms maneuver. You know, as folks watched over the last 600 days, Russia invade Ukraine, there were some who were quick to say the days of the tank are over. Clearly a wrong lesson. I think what we've seen is tanks are a key part of the combined arms formation. Tanks without infantry and artillery and aviation and all the other things may be challenged. But we've all seen, or many of us have seen, that nothing breaks open an urban fight faster than a tank. But we've also probably seen that nothing stops an armored attack faster than a bunch of infantrymen on the flanks with javelins. So clearly you got to put it all together and synchronize it in a symphony of destruction, as we like to say. But clearly the tank still has a role. I've been happy to hear in the transformation discussions all the effort to try to reduce the logistics tail of our tanks and therefore make them even more lethal and more pertinent in the future fight. I don't know, General James, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, sir, thank you very much. I concur completely, and sometimes the descriptors we apply to our formations are unhelpful. Yeah, an armoured formation, an armoured brigade, an ABCT, an armoured division, etc. Ultimately, whether you're light, heavy, or in the middle of the spectrum, we are all combined arms formations, and that is the only way, particularly as we seek to integrate multi-domain effects from across the domains, that we increasingly have to see that as an extension of combined arms manoeuvre, whether you're a parachute, BCT, or you are an armoured BCT or division. To answer the direct question about the future of the tank, I think the focus on the defensive when we've looked at Ukraine has been clearly tempting, and it is the stronger form of war, and we need to exploit that. But in the context of NATO or any fight where we are trying to take back territory, as the Ukrainians are at the moment, when you ask yourself the question, with the current physics applied to the battlefield, how does one restore the offensive? I would argue those who predict the demise of the tank, well, it's very difficult to see how you restore the offensive without armour when you're going through a combined arms obstacle belt.
So I think the other thing that's perhaps good as we wind up now, so I'm saying we're winding up. So if you're holding on to that question and you were trying to get the confidence to ask it, now would be the time to make your way to a microphone. As we look to the next year, I wonder if each of you could address what your priorities are, what's on your radar for the near term. And when we reconvene here next year, what do you hope to be able to say that you've accomplished?
My first year in Forces Command is now behind me. We came into the 90-day assessment, and we talked about, again, first fight, future fight, and then building the team. As we've looked at the last year, what we saw is we really were winning that first fight at the soldier level, the squad, platoon, and company at our CTCs, where we were assessing that. Where we had our gap was at the battalion and the brigade, and being predictive over time horizons, synchronizing warfighting functions, and building tempo. In fact, we lost tempo because we were so focused on that fight. We've now reintegrated and reincorporated multi-echelon training. Our focus the past year has been on the battalion and the brigade and building the competencies, never walking away from the foundational readiness. We know that will always be maintained. But focus on the battalion and the brigade to build a level of competence and execution so you can get to that point of excellence, which is mission command. Because we have to have that level of competence at those echelons if we're going to migrate to the division. Because you talked about providing effects, whether kinetic or not kinetic. You have to be able to articulate at your next higher echelon. The brigades have to tell the divisions, you have this capability, here's what I need you to provide for me on this time horizon in order to set the conditions for me to be successful. If you're not functioning as a highly efficient staff, you can't do that. So we're going to focus the next year. I'll come back, and we've seen the progress already. The battalions and the brigades. Simultaneous, we're introducing this divisional rotation in the dirt strategy, coming off a warfighter, highly proficient at the functions and processes, rotating you in the dirt. We're doing 2 a year. 2 a year. The next one's going to be in January. We keep expanding in that. So, and we come back, and what I want to build to, by the end of my 3rd year, I'm wearing a good-looking suit like Mr. Dorman back there, my old mentor when I was a young captain, and I'll be out, but I want to get to the point where we have a full division, not just the functional brigades, but think Louisiana maneuvers, where we're functioning as a whole division with the maneuver brigades, the aviation brigade, the functional brigades that are out there, and a time and space, whether it's Fort Bliss or at NTC itself, so you can watch all 20,000 maneuvering in time and space, executing in a contested environment. That's where we're going to refine our profession at the divisional level.
Thank you, sir.
So in line with my boss's priorities,
I do see a little promotion for you.
Our role, the 3rd Armor Corps is to enable exactly that, to make sure that we work with NTC and JRTC and even at our home stations to come up with a really good way to train divisions in the dirt with all those enablers and to help think through that. One of the things that became apparent when we thought about this is if we've got a division out there as the training audience, suddenly the Corps commander is the senior trainer, and the Corps staff has to be there to provide all the right injects and drivers for the division, and oh, by the way, to provide headquarters to talk to for the division staff. And we also obviously have to work together in concert to converge effects. So we have a role at the 3rd Armor Corps to help develop that over the next year and to practice it and to pave the way for other corps to do that in other places. If I can have a second priority, the 3rd Armor Corps is working hard with the enterprise on this C2 system, the command and control system, making sure that our command posts at echelon are agile and mobile and survivable. And we're moving quickly as an Army, and we have injected ourselves into that conversation. So one of our priorities in the next year is to really accelerate that conversation and put it into practice, and to make sure that at echelon, for the entire tactical formation from Corps down to the companies and batteries and troops, that we're enabling commander decision-making, and that we're doing it in a way where we're survivable, agile, and of course, effective. So two priorities, thanks.
It's allowed. Thank you, sir.
So as I look at the future year, I suppose the flippant answer would be my most immediate priority is to get through another warfighter. This time with 5th Corps, #glutton for punishment. So but that's the short-term goal. The reality is, what is the challenge that faces the 3rd United Kingdom Division for the next year? It's balancing, maintaining the appropriate readiness, which underpins everything else. And I am fully bought into the US view of this. Readiness for warfighting underpins everything else. Balancing that with the spending of that readiness, the operational tasks and commitments that come thick and fast, and seeing what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, I can see no reduction in that demand signal. Balancing those two things, and now there's a third ball in there that we need to kind of juggle and deal with, and that is modernization. And the modernization for the British Army is now within a horizon that my units and brigades have to start thinking about how, whilst doing those other two things, readiness and spending it, have to begin to integrate our new platforms for the 3rd and 4th decades of the 21st century. So it's Challenger 3, it's Ajax, our reconnaissance vehicle coming online, it's Boxer, our heavy mechanized force, it's the Archer 155 to replace those AS-90s we've gifted to Ukraine. And of course, it's the recapitalization of our M270s under the US program. So when you ask in a year's time if I were back here, I would hope to have been able to balance those 3 Venn diagram circles in a way that allows us to maintain our equilibrium without giving up on any readiness, ready to face what our nations need us to be. Thank you.
So we're going to move into closing statements, and it's a little unfair of me, given that excellent final remarks, really, that you offered, sir. But is there anything else you would like to send out to the folks in the room here and who are listening online as your final main takeaway from AUSA and this panel?
I think I'd just reiterate the theme that has sort of percolated and run through like a golden thread all the discussions this week, and that's it's something General Rainey said at the Futures Contemporary Military Forum up here, which is that it's our people that give us the advantage. And that may be a slightly hackneyed phrase to say, but I truly believe it's the difference maker. It's our center of gravity. How do our people manifest their excellence, their skill, the advantage they give us? You know, with the way they think, us all representing liberal democracies, it's through teams and forging effective teams. So I feel incredibly privileged to have been part of a US-led warfighting team that has created the conditions that allow our people to thrive in what is, you know, the ultimate test and demand of humankind, which is large-scale combat operations and warfighting. So as long as we retain that focus and do everything in our power to build those effective teams, I think we have, you know, an unbeatable advantage.
Thank you. General Bernabe.
So, you know, we've talked about how we're changing the context of our training to make sure that we're keeping pace with the realities of war today as we see them overseas. But some things have not changed. As we do all that, we still have to care for our people in all the ways we care for them. We have to develop those leaders I talked about a little while ago who are proficient, engaged, and empathetic. We have to build teams, as we've talked about throughout this forum, teams that are cohesive and inclusive and disciplined. We have to make sure our individual soldiers have truly mastered those individual tasks of warfighting. And then we have to put those individuals together in staffs and crews and units to make sure that we are a lethal team of teams. And then when it's all said and done, we have to be ready. As General Papa said, we're not sure exactly ready for what, but we know we got to be ready. So again, those things haven't changed. We'll continue to change the context of our training to make sure it's tough and realistic, but we must do those other 6 things always. Thank you.
Thank you. General Papas.
First, I'd like to thank you, Ms. Caroline, and for Sean and James for being up here. Obviously, you get to pick who gets to sit the panel with you, and I did it based on my understanding and knowledge of each one of them. True professionals, experts of the profession, and I hope that showed today. And these are the 2 that are going to carry the formal formations forward into the future in that fight. And I'll see you back at Fort Liberty, and we'll continue on with our academic discussions to continue to refine that paradigm. I'll end with where we started. The future is not written. But what I can assure you, what I do know, is that our formations today are fully trained, and they will be in the future, and we will dominate that first fight.
Thank you, sir. On that rousing note, please join me in thanking our terrific panelists for their comments today.
Thank you.
Thank you all.